Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. When the government first rolled out programming to respond to the COVID-19 shutdown, it was filled with the old classic rule that no good deed went unpunished. They created an income support program for workers, but ripped it away the second that those same workers earned more than $1,000. In other words, punishing the good deed of working hard and earning money. They created a wage subsidy, but then tore it away as soon as a business was able to recover more than 70% of its pre-COVID revenues. Again, punishing a business for the crime of recuperating revenue and rebuilding the economy. We warned early on that these anti-work, anti-earnings disincentives would penalize the very people who were working hard to put our economy back on its feet in the post-closure period. The government ignored our concerns and delayed, and in the meantime, countless workers and businesses have faced the impossible dilemma of whether or not they should go back to earning what they made before the pandemic began. Now, you can, if you want, you can try to judge these people who are out in the world facing that dilemma. But before you do, think about the waitress, for example, whose employer may go bankrupt because of the enormous revenue loss that he experienced during the shutdown. If she goes back and earns $1,200 and he does go under, then she loses her job and she's lost her CERB. In other words, she has no income at all a penalty the government imposes upon her for having worked too hard, having exerted too much effort to rebuild her finances and support her employer and community. Same goes for businesses up until now who commit the offense of regaining lost revenues. If they are down less than 30%, that is to say, if they recover more than 70% of their pre-COVID revenue, they lose the wage subsidy. And for many of them, the extra revenue would be worth less than the wage subsidy, in which case the perfectly rational and in many cases necessary decision for them would be to suppress their revenues in order to qualify for the very assistance that will keep them alive and allow them to employ their workers. Finally, the government has come forward with a proposal to address that disincentive with the wage subsidy. Unfortunately, what we see in this proposal is a cobweb of complexity. Let me break down just how complex it will be and how bewildering it will become for businesses who are trying to make sense of it all. First, we see that there are now effectively four periods, that remain until the subsidy is phased out altogether. In each of those 4 periods, the rate of subsidy is different from the other. And then there are 3 scenarios that apply to those 4 periods. There's the first scenario where you are a business that has lost less than 50% of your revenue, in which case you're entitled to the base subsidy. And then there's the second scenario, in which case your business is down more than 50%, in which case you are eligible for both the base and the top-up. And then there's the third scenario where your employees are furloughed or quote-unquote on leave, in which case there will be yet another and different rate of compensation paid through the subsidy. Now, don't even get me started on businesses that have both furloughed and non-furloughed employees. If you just take the basic permutations and combinations that I've mentioned, businesses could face over the next 4 months 15, 20, 30 different rates of wage subsidy that they will have to begin to somehow understand with the help of very expensive accountants and consultants as they go forward and try to make business decisions. This complexity will no doubt impose massive new costs, unpredictability, and uncertainty on the very people who are struggling just to open their doors. They're already facing a whole series of public safety rules imposed by their municipalities, rules that are hard themselves to follow burdensome and costly to implement. And now they will have to plow through an already complicated system of taxation in order to make sense of an even more complicated system of subsidies. We put forward proposals in numerous conversations with the minister that could have made this simple. Why couldn't they, for example, have just expanded the Canada Emergency Business Account to lend businesses their prior month's revenue loss and then forgive repayment on 75% of whatever businesses spent of that amount on wages? There's your wage subsidy. No complexity. Scaled to revenue loss. No disincentive. Easy to administer. Available at your local bank. But of course that was not the option the government took. No, instead they had to come up with the most complicated system possible so that the only two sectors that will experience any benefit from that complexity, of course, are the accountants and the tax lawyers that will be paid to implement and make sense of it. Although I suspect many of them will have to hire PhDs in astrophysics in order to make sense of some of the finer details of this particular proposal. Simpler is better. Simplification should always be the goal of government policy so that we know exactly what we're trying to accomplish and the beneficiaries know how to accomplish it. So we as Conservatives call on the government to look for ways to simplify the implementation of this, and we call on them to signal to the Canada Revenue Agency to be as reasonable as possible in the enforcement and in the subsequent cases of accidental and incidental errors that are inevitably going to be the result of small businesses tripping over many of the tripwires that are found in this complex proposal. All of that being said, at the very least, we can give the government for some credit for belatedly realizing the necessity to remove the penalties on businesses who are recovering their revenues while trying to employ their workers. Now let's turn our attention to those very same workers. Under the current Canada Emergency Response Benefit, a worker who earns $999 can keep the $2,000 CERB. But if they earn $1,001, they lose that same benefit. In other words, they are taking one step forward in order to be pushed 2 steps back. No one would make the decision to earn $1,000 in order to lose $2,000. The effective tax rate on such a person would be 200%. That is a major and unacceptable penalty for work. It is also a problem with an obvious solution. I see here the member for Haldimand Norfolk, who was once the employment minister and helped to bring in a solution to this same problem under the employment insurance program. She, in the previous Harper government, helped bring in the Working Well on Claim system, which allowed people on EI to go out and get a job and lose only 50 cents of their EI for every dollar they earn. That means they'd always be 50 cents better off for each of those dollars. And that should be the basic system of our basic principle of our tax and transfer system, is that you should always be better off when you work more, when you earn more, when you take one more shift. Now, our party has very meticulously assembled a proposal for the government that would solve this anti-work problem, that would give our working class people the rewards they deserve for going back into their jobs and taking as many shifts as they can possibly take. Our proposal is simple, and it is this: that for anyone earning less than $1,000, nothing would change. They'd still get their $2,000 CERB, but for every dollar they earn above $1,000, they would lose only 50 cents of their CERB. And of course, all of this could be reconciled at tax time. Governments already have records of people's earnings because employers submit the payroll remittances, and the government knows exactly what people earn and when they earn it, and it would be very easy using the highly sophisticated CRA software for this all to be calculated automatically and for people's final amounts to be reconciled at tax time on their returns. And so we put this proposal forward. It would allow every single worker to be better off when they go out into the workforce and get themselves another dollar. It would mean that people would lose their CERB only gradually as they earn between $1,000 and $6,000, so that every day, in every way, workers who contribute to their employer, get businesses back on their feet, serve local customers, pay taxes, contribute to the economy, are rewarded for doing so. Now, the government, the parliamentary budget officer has said that our proposal would be affordable. It would be a minor cost, and I believe, frankly, when the behavioral changes that would result from it are taken into account, I believe the government would be net better off as a result of rewarding rather than punishing work. Now, this is, of course, a problem that most left-wing governments have, is they don't believe that there is any limit to the amount of taxation they can impose upon people. They don't understand the impact that incentives have on human and economic behavior. And that is why we see ever larger tax rates that punish people for exerting themselves and for contributing to their employers, that take away from risk takers, from entrepreneurs, and from working class people. We on this side of the House believe in restoring the value and rewarding the exertion of work, because work is the only thing that generates the product of our nation. And we know that no matter what government program you create, you cannot replace the prodigious output of our 20 million Canadian workers and the 1.2 million businesses that employ them. No government program can ever do that. The only way to recharge our economy and to replenish our wealth from the enormous costs that we have incurred and the debts we have mounted is by getting our workers and our businesses firing on all cylinders once again. Beyond just fixing the problems and the penalties in these programs, we also need to unleash the power of free enterprise across our economy. There are parts of the economy that the government began shutting down years before COVID-19. For example, the energy sector. They had imposed a shutdown on the energy sector by blocking 3 pipelines and a major northern Alberta mine well before the COVID-19 pandemic ever appeared. They can begin to reverse those anti-development policies. They can, for example, look at the inventory of $20 billion of resource projects that await federal approval, and they can expedite decisions on them now, so that billions of dollars of privately funded economic activity can begin without any cost to Canadian taxpayers. This includes a massive $14 billion pipeline and LNG plant in the Saguenay region of Quebec. It includes smaller pipeline projects and mines right across the country. These projects are already delayed too long. Now would be a time, if you really wanted a stimulus, a free market, privately funded stimulus that will reduce debt rather than adding to it, now would be the time to expedite those exact same projects. Now would be the time to begin to draw the lines of a future energy corridor connecting East Coast refineries with Western petroleum, opening the door to the sale and the transmission of electricity from the prodigious hydro dams of Quebec to other energy-starved communities in provinces across the country, to put an end to the insanity of selling our energy at massive discounts, not just oil and gas, but also hydroelectricity to our American neighbors to the south, when we pay premiums for that same energy here in our very own country. Now would be the time to go through our tax system page by page and start tearing out all of the penalties we impose on businesses that produce wealth and workers that generate it. That now would be the time to eliminate the enormous delays that are involved in building anything in this country. It takes 3 times longer to get a warehouse approved for construction in Canada than it does in the United States of America. Just one example of why so much capital has left our country for our southern neighbors and for many other economies around the world. We went into this crisis as a country. We went in weak, 0.3% unemployment. Higher unemployment, in fact, than all other G7 countries except for France and Italy, whose socialist policies our government was working hard to emulate. We went in with growth that was roughly half of that in the United States of America, with half our population, $200 away from insolvency, and bankruptcies and insolvencies skyrocketing in the latter months of the 2019 year. We went in with a $29 billion deficit before the very first case of COVID-19 was discovered in this country. We went in with the second highest level of debt in the G7 when you take public and private debt combined. Only Japan has higher combined public-private debt than Canada did in 2018 at 356% of GDP. And now that number has grown further. We now have a government that is adding this year $343 billion of debt. Money it believes literally can be created out of thin air, that we can simply count on the Bank of Canada through keystrokes to generate this currency out of nothing. The Bank of Canada has created $500 billion since March and used that money to buy bonds, mostly government bonds. In other words, our governments across this country are currently being financed by fake currency that is literally pulled out of thin air. And this Prime Minister thinks that can go on forever, as though he invented the idea of turning on the printing presses to pay for a government. We know for thousands of years, emperors and kings and others have tried to pay their bills by creating currency from nothing, whether they clipped coins so that the gold in them could go a little bit further, whether they took drachmas and wrote 2 where there once was 1, whether they did more recently cranked up the printing presses and pumped out cash until inflation was skyrocketing. The result in the long run is always the same. When you create money from nothing, that money begins to be worth nothing. Now, we are not there yet, but we must plan for the day when eventually there are too many dollars chasing too few goods. And when that happens, the value of the dollar will decline. Now, this will be wonderful news for the very rich, of course, because their assets will inflate in value and they will become richer still. But it will be terrible news for the wage-earning, blue-collar people of this country whose wages will be devalued, who will be earning less money for every hour they put in. And that brings us back to my very first point, that we in this country should always reward and never punish work, that we should unbridle the power of the laborer and the entrepreneur to join hands in the production of wealth, to finance the lifestyle and the economy that our country deserves, to pay for our national programs, our national defense, our social safety net, and for a quality of life that we in a country like Canada have become accustomed to and which we should only exceed in the days ahead. Madam Chair, I thank you very much for the occasion to address this issue, and we stand ready to work with the government to improve these policies, to correct their faulty ways, and to make our country better yet. Thank you.